Imagine waking up on a January morning in the year 1300. The air inside your home is so cold you can see your breath. There's no thermostat to adjust, no radiator to huddle beside, no electric blanket. How did anyone survive? Medieval homes were built from stone, timber, and clay, materials that offered little insulation by modern standards. Walls were thick, but gaps and cracks were everywhere. Windows, if they'd existed at all, had no glass for the poor. There were no furnaces, no chimneys in most homes until the late medieval period, and certainly no central heating. Yet families endured months of freezing temperatures. The question isn't whether they were cold. They were. It's how they didn't freeze to death. The answer lies in a simple truth. Medieval people weren't trying to stay comfortable. They were trying to stay alive. And survival required a combination of architecture, behavior, and sheer endurance that we've almost entirely forgotten. At the heart of almost every medieval home was the hearth, an open fire pit, usually in the center of the main room. This wasn't a cozy fireplace. It was a smoky, inefficient source of heat that filled the room with fumes. Without a chimney, smoke rose to the rafters and eventually escaped through gaps in the roof or a small hole called a louve. The air was thick, eyes stung, and lungs suffered. But the alternative was freezing. Wood was the primary fuel, but it wasn't unlimited. Forests were managed carefully through a practice called coppicing, cutting trees to encourage regrowth. Running out of firewood in January could mean death, so families rationed it carefully. The hearth fire was kept burning as long as possible, often all day and into the night. Letting it go out meant the laborious task of relighting it. No matches, no lighters, just flint, steel, and tinder. At night, families slept as close to the hearth as safely possible. Beds, if they had them, were positioned near the fire. The poorest slept on straw mats on the floor, huddled together for warmth. Shared body heat was essential. Parents, children, even extended family members slept in the same room, often in the same bed. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford when survival was at stake. In rural homes, animals were brought inside during winter. Cows, pigs, chickens, they lived in a section of the house or just below in a lower level. Their body heat rose and warmed the human living space above. Walls were often made of wattle and daub, woven wooden strips covered with a mixture of clay, straw, dung, and mud. When dry, this provided some insulation, but it cracked in cold weather, letting in drafts. Families stuffed cracks with moss, rags, or more straw. Maintenance was constant. A well-sealed home could mean the difference between tolerable cold and unbearable misery. Every autumn, repairs were essential. Roofs were thatched with straw or reeds, layered thick. Thatch is surprisingly good insulation when dry, trapping air and slowing heat loss. But it required regular maintenance and could rot or catch fire. Floors were often bare earth or stone, both of which radiated cold. To combat this, families laid down rushes, long grassy plants, that provided a thin layer of insulation and trapped some warmth. They were replaced seasonally. Wealthier families hung tapestries or heavy cloth on walls. These weren't just decoration. They created an air gap between the cold stone and the living space, reducing drafts and providing a psychological sense of warmth. Beds often had heavy curtains that could be drawn closed at night, creating a small enclosed space. Body heat was trapped inside, making the microclimate around the sleeper significantly warmer than the room. People wore layers of wool and linen, day and night. Wool retains warmth even when damp, which was crucial in the humid, smoky interiors. Many never fully undressed in winter, sleeping in their day clothes. Hats, hoods, and head coverings were worn indoors. Heat escapes rapidly from the head, and keeping it covered was a simple but effective way to retain body warmth. Bare heads were for summer. Before bed, people heated stones by the fire and wrapped them in cloth, placing them in the bed to warm it. These makeshift bed warmers held heat for hours, making the first moments under the covers bearable. Wealthier households used braziers, metal containers filled with hot coals. These were portable and could be moved from room to room, but they posed a serious risk of fire and carbon monoxide poisoning in enclosed spaces. Medieval homes were small by design. The less space to heat, the better. Rooms had low ceilings, narrow doorways, and few windows. Every cubic foot of air had to be warmed by that single hearth. Windows were covered with wooden shutters, not glass. Glass was expensive and rare. Shutters blocked wind but also blocked light, so winter days indoors were dark, cold, and smoky, a grim trade-off. Lighting came from tallow candles or oil lamps, which provided a tiny amount of heat along with light. But fuel for light was also precious. So many families simply went to bed when the sun set. Winter meant long nights and short days. Work, meals, and social life revolved around daylight hours. When darkness fell, there was little to do but sleep, conserve energy, and wait for dawn. Hot meals were vital. Stews, porridges, and soups cooked over the hearth provided internal warmth. Eating hot food raised body temperature temporarily, and the act of cooking added heat to the room. People drank warm ale, spiced wine, or heated cider. Cold water was avoided, not just for safety, but because cold drinks lowered body temperature. Warmth came from the inside out. In larger manor houses, the Great Hall served as a communal living space. Dozens of people gathered around a central hearth, sharing warmth, food, and body heat. Isolation was dangerous. Community was survival. Ironically, castles were among the coldest places to live. Their massive stone walls, high ceilings, and defensive design made them nearly impossible to heat. Even nobility suffered in winter, despite their wealth. That's why lords and ladies retreated to smaller private chambers in winter, rooms that could actually be warmed. The grand hall was for show. The small chamber was for survival. The chimney as we know it, a vertical flue drawing smoke up and out, became common only in the late medieval period, around the 14th and 15th centuries. Before that, smoke was simply endured. Chimneys allowed for fireplaces built into walls, which radiated heat more efficiently and kept smoke out of living areas. This innovation transformed domestic life, making homes warmer, cleaner, and healthier. Still, for the vast majority of medieval people, peasants, laborers, the poor, chimneys remained out of reach. They continued to live in smoky, drafty, freezing homes well into the early modern period. Frostbite, chilblains, and respiratory illness were common. Many didn't survive the winter, especially the very young and very old. Cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. Winter was a season of endurance, a test of resourcefulness and resilience. Every autumn, families prepared, gathering wood, repairing walls, storing food, knowing that survival depended on preparation. There was no thermostat to adjust, no backup heater to switch on. If the fire went out, if the wood ran low, if the walls failed, there was no safety net. Survival was active, constant, exhausting. Today, we've forgotten what it meant to live without heating. We take warmth for granted, adjusting a dial without thought. But for most of human history, warmth was earned, defended, and sometimes lost. Medieval people weren't helpless. They adapted, innovated, and survived using the materials and knowledge they had. Their techniques, layering, insulation, shared heat, were born from necessity, refined over generations. The very design of medieval homes was shaped by the need to conserve heat. Small rooms, low ceilings, thick walls, central hearths, every choice was a response to the brutal reality of winter. Comfort was never the goal. Survival was. And survival meant cold fingers, smoky air, sleepless nights, and the constant gnawing awareness that winter could kill you if you let your guard down. Heat, as we know it, was a privilege reserved for the very few. And even they were cold. The warm, climate-controlled world we inhabit today is a modern miracle, one our ancestors could never have imagined. Medieval people endured winter not because they had clever technology, but because they had no choice. They layered, they huddled, they burned what they could, and they survived. That resilience is part of our heritage. So the next time you adjust your thermostat, remember, warmth was once fought for, rationed, and sometimes lost. The cost of staying warm was measured not in money, but in constant effort and vigilance. We live in comfort because generations before us learned, adapted, and innovated. The medieval struggle against cold laid the foundation for the heating systems we now take for granted. We owe them our warmth. What surprised you most about medieval heating? Could you survive a winter without modern technology? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you learned something new, consider subscribing for more deep dives into forgotten history.